Hey guys, it's Lewis from Recycle Bicycle Sales here. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to prepare for your first triathlon. Here at Recycle Bicycle Sales, a lot of the people that come in and buy their first ever road bike are saying to me, Lewis, I'm getting into triathlon. What do I need to know? So in today's video, we're going to run through some of the things that I learned throughout my journey of getting into triathlon. To give a very quick background into what a triathlon actually is, if you didn't know already before clicking on this video, a triathlon is an endurance event. It takes 3 different disciplines. It starts with a swim, so you go for a swim in the water, and then you go for a long cycle, a long bike ride, and then you go for a run to finish it all off. A pretty sort of difficult event, I suppose, and a lot of people really love it because it's a real endurance test. One of the first things to think about when you're getting into triathlon is what distance you're gonna do. There's so many different lengths of race that we can talk about, but I'm gonna split it into 4 main categories, and I'll put them up on the side of the screen just here as well. The first one is a sprint distance. Sprint is a really good spot to start. It's a relatively short race. I suppose it might take maybe like an hour, give or take, and you're still gonna get all 3 disciplines in, and you get to do one after the other. So it's a legitimate triathlon. We can work our way up to an Olympic distance, which will have a significantly longer swim, which is a real good test for some people, or we can go a level up to an Ironman 70.3. They call it 70.3 because the total distance that you do in miles, not kilometers, the total distance you do in miles is 70.3 miles. Or you can double the 70.3 and do an Ironman. A full Ironman is honestly a pretty big deal. If you meet someone that says, I've done a full Ironman, that's like, you've got to tip your hat to that. That's like 12 hours, 15 hours of full throttle exercise, like out in the sun. It's a pretty big deal. So you don't want to start with a full Ironman. I recommend starting with a sprint distance. That's what I did at least. If you already think that you have a really good base fitness and you've already been able to run a marathon before, you've already done a grand fondo on your bike, you spend a bit of time in the pool, you might find that you might be able to start at an Olympic distance. It's a little bit longer, but it'll give you a really good taste of what a triathlon is. And if you're really crazy and watch David Goggins in your spare time, you could start with a 70.3, but I highly recommend not starting with a full distance Ironman. You might hurt yourself. It's a pretty darn long day out there. Now, when you start triathlon, you've got to prepare yourself that you are gonna have to buy a few things. You're starting 3 different sports now. So if we start with the first one, swimming, some of the things that you might need to buy are perhaps maybe even like a gym membership, somewhere that has a pool so you can do some training back and forth. You might need a swimming cap and some goggles. If you're doing some proper training and structured training, your coach might say you need flippers or special pants that are buoyant or all these different things. That can get a little bit extreme. I think if we're just starting, you've got to have goggles and a swimming cap. However, as you start to progress and you start to get into the actual racing side of things, you'll eventually want to get yourself a tri-suit. The reason I say that you want a tri-suit is when you come out of the water after doing your swim and you're about to go onto the bike, you've already got your clothes on. You don't have to try and get changed in the transition because it's a timed section of the race, so you don't want to waste time getting changed. And it's already got pockets in the back, so you can put your gels or your Cliff Bars or whatever in your back pocket, so you've got them for the next section of the triathlon, which is the bike ride. Speaking of the cycling leg, these are the things that you're gonna need to buy. The elephant in the room for the bike leg is you're gonna need a bike. Good guess. When we're talking about getting a bike, a lot of the people that walk into the bike shop in here say, Lewis, I'm getting into triathlon and I don't know what I need to buy. Oh, I want to get a triathlon bike and rah, rah, rah. I always say, or at least my opinion here is, and I'm sure plenty of people watching this video might agree too, don't start with a triathlon bike like this. These are the fastest thing you've ever ridden, but I often compare them across to race cars. Having a bike like this is the fastest thing you'll ever ride, but you're only gonna ride it on race day. It's kind of like having a GT3 Cup car. The fastest thing you'll race around the track, but you need a trailer to get it to the track. Whereas if you just bought your normal GT3 RS sports car, you can drive it to the racetrack, race it, and then drive it home. So that's a much better value for money. That's why I think you should start with just your standard road bike with the standard drop-down handlebars. I've got a couple of different reasons for that as well. These are incredibly fast in a straight line, yes, but as soon as you come to a roundabout or a corner or a traffic light or anything that's something other than a perfectly straight line, they're a little bit difficult to control. Having a road bike like this means you can do some training up in the hills, get a little bit stronger. You can go down to the beach. It's easy to put your foot down at traffic lights, a little bit more comfortable. There's a lot more benefits from a racing road bike than there are from a triathlon bike. If you've been doing triathlon for a while, this is a pretty cool bike to upgrade to, but I don't think it's going to replace your bike. I think it's going to add to your fleet. And this video is aimed at people getting into triathlon, not professional triathletes. Although, thank you for watching if you are watching anyway, and then you're allowed to buy one of these bikes, you've earned it. Part of the reason that I recommend starting on a normal racing road bike is as you're riding along, your hands will be sitting here for most of the bike ride. I say it's up in the hoods. It's good because you're able to reach both of the brakes and all the different gears that you need to. Whereas when we move across to one of these triathlon bikes and you're sitting up here in your aerodynamic position, you've got the gear shifters here. These are gear shifters on both sides, which is cool. But if you need to reach the brakes, you've got to take your hand off for a second, come down onto the drop bar, and then grab both of the brakes. So you really have to be quite aware of your surroundings. So when you're up like this in a straight line, incredibly fast, but dangerous if you have to stop quite quickly. So that's why I say you should start on a road bike, and then if you've got some spare cash, then you can upgrade to a triathlon bike. And you wouldn't want to be riding one of these every day for training because they're not necessarily the most comfortable thing. They're just designed to be really fast. As well as buying the bike, there's a few other parts that you're gonna need to buy. Some of them aren't necessities, but they're gonna make the whole ride quite a bit easier. So it doesn't have to be ruthlessly expensive, but you are gonna have to put a few dollars aside for the cycling leg. The first necessity would be the helmet. The helmet is the thing that's gonna save your life if your head was to hit the ground, or at least save you from a gnarly concussion or something like that. You absolutely have to be wearing a helmet. There might be different areas in the world that you legally don't have to. I don't care. I think you should always be wearing a helmet anyway, because buying a helmet is cheaper than buying a wheelchair later on. That's a rough thing to say, but that's my opinion. When you're picking your helmet, it's really important that you pick the correct helmet. Make sure that it's nice and safe and it fits you properly. If you want a more in-depth video about making sure that you get the right helmet, we've done one further back in our YouTube channel. I think that that's an important video to watch before you go and spend money on a new helmet. The second part I think you're gonna need are the correct clothing. If you've been watching our YouTube videos for a while and you consider yourself a cyclist, chances are you already have some of these things. You might already have your t-shirt and your padded shorts as well. The reason that I say that these parts are quite important is on the shirt, we've got pockets at the back, so you can put your gels and your energy bars or maybe even your mobile phone into there, or a repair kit or anything like that. You've got pockets that you can reach nice and easily. And I think the padded shorts are super important as well. You can see this red part in here, which is the chamois. That's the part that you're sitting down on while you're riding. If you were to look at the size of that saddle, it doesn't exactly look very comfortable. It's just a tiny little bike saddle. So if we've got our padded shorts, it's gonna make it more comfortable. And since it's made of like a chamois material, it's able to wick away any moisture, any sweat while you're riding. So it's gonna help avoid any chafing. I know this might not seem like a big deal, but I think it'll be quite clear to you after your first bike ride how important having padded shorts are. All right, we're done with the needs and now for the wants. Some of the things you're gonna want are some clip-in pedals and some clip-in shoes. You don't have to start with clips because sometimes jumping across to a racing road bike can be a little bit daunting. The gears and the brakes are maybe in a different spot than when you were a child. So you're learning so many different things. You're listening for the cars, potholes, indicating, taking a drink of water. There's so many things that you're trying to learn while you're riding. Adding clips in right at the start can make it a little bit difficult and confusing. But when you're ready, we've got a YouTube video further back in our YouTube channel talking about how to transition across to clip-in pedals. That might be an epic video to go and watch. You might learn a couple of things when you're ready to move across to the clips. You might also like some sunglasses. Again, not a necessity, but definitely a want. When you've got sunglasses on and there's all the wind that's blowing in your face, or perhaps there's bugs in the air, they're not getting stuck into your eyes. It'll help you be able to see a little bit better, and it will keep your eyes nice and safe while you're riding. And another one is a GPS head unit. If you've already been a runner or already been a swimmer or already been a cyclist, chances are you've already heard of Strava. Strava is an app that goes onto your phone, and if you're talking about getting into triathlon and really training for the triathlon, you will start to learn Strava as becoming your Bible. It's the most important thing. It talks all about the training you've been doing, how well you're progressing, and all of this sort of stuff. These GPS head units are perfect for when you're on the bike, because if you're wearing a watch, which you probably would have been wearing in your swim, and you're probably still gonna wear it in your run because it can record the whole activity, it's difficult to see what sort of speed you're doing. I guess it's less important in a race the more I think about it, but I always like to have a head unit on my bike, even just for all of my training as well. But on race day, I'm also wearing a watch. Another thing that you're gonna want on your bike are some water bottle cages. This particular example here has one on the handlebars, so it's nice and easy to reach while we're riding, and it even has two at the back. So that kind of tells me that this is for a pretty long distance event. I also know that the previous owner of this bike does the full distance Ironman, so he's set it up so that he can do those big 11 or 12-hour events that he's doing. If you bought your bike from Recycle Bicycle Sales, you might already have a water bottle cage on there, but if you didn't, that might be the next upgrade. When we're talking about getting into the running, there's really only a couple of things that you need, and some of these things you might already have from getting ready for the bike event. The first thing that you're gonna need is a proper set of running shoes, like these Cloud shoes here. I say that because they've got a much thicker sole and better support while you're running, whereas these skate shoes have a much thinner sole. They look really cool. They're good for, walking around and, doing skate park stuff, but not good for running in a long distance because the impact that your foot's gonna feel under each step is pretty hardcore. So making sure you've got a good set of running shoes. Go down to your local shoe shop and get to try a few on. They'll measure your foot, they'll find out what you need. And if you say to them, hey, by the way, one of the goals that I have is getting into triathlon, that will help the salesperson direct you towards a really appropriate shoe for exactly that discipline. Some of the other things that you're gonna need that you might already have from the bike are the watch that you were wearing before. You were hopefully wearing this in the swim as well, so that you can keep an eye on how fast you're going and maybe how your heart rate's sitting, or when you're running, you can look at the pace that you're doing or how far you've been or all these different stats, and you can upload to your Strava when you get home so that you can keep an eye on your progress, that Bible we were talking about before. Some sunglasses are always nice as well. Not a necessity, but I definitely like to run along with sunglasses because I feel quite a bit of wind in my face, especially if I'm doing like a speed session or something, just to keep my eyes clear from all the dust that's in the air and even just the sun, I suppose. You could even just say you might like to wear a hat as well. My hair's relatively short at the moment, but sometimes when it's long, it flaps around in my face. So if I've got a hat on, that can help keep my hair out of my eyes. Seems like a small thing, but if you've done a bit of running, you know what I mean. You'll also want lots of sunscreen. That's the same for the cycling as well. And another thing as well, now I'm not very qualified on this topic, but I've heard my sister say that if you're a female and you're out running, having a nice sports bra will always help as well. And if you're a guy, I could kind of say the same thing, getting some nice pants that fit you properly because, well, because. The next thing that you're gonna need to do before jumping into your first triathlon is a bit of training and even just practicing. By that, I mean training is training your body, getting a lot of maybe swimming or riding or running under your belt so that you're really good at each of these different disciplines. But when I say practice, I kind of even mean something as simple as tying up your shoelaces or, putting socks onto your wet feet or something like that. I know it sounds like a small thing, but I remember learning that the hard way in my first triathlon, coming out of the water, and I got to the transition and my feet are covered in sand because I've run out of the ocean and I'm trying to put socks onto my wet sandy feet. And I know it sounds like a small thing, but they're some of the things that you learn. So practicing transitioning and getting into your cycling clothes or practicing jumping onto the bike, after the transition line, not jumping on too early. It could be practicing dismounting off of the bike because sometimes the ground might be a little bit slippery where you're putting your foot down. There's lots of different things that you might want to practice. An important thing that you hear a lot of triathletes talk about in their training is doing a brick session. When they say a brick session, they mean they're going for a run off the bike. So they've gone for their bike ride and then they'll go for a run straight after. It doesn't have to be a long run, but you will find that if you just go for a random run on a Sunday morning versus a random run straight after going on the bike, it does feel quite different. Your legs have been doing the exact same motion on the bike for so long, and then you jump across running and now your steps are quite a bit longer and you'll be doing a significantly faster pace than you realized just by accident. So I think it's good to be able to practice that before you get to the actual race day. Another type of brick session you can do is just simply taking it easy and riding on your way to the swimming pool, doing your swimming session and then riding hard home. That'll give you a good chance to feel how your body's gonna feel riding your bike while your body's wet or when your arms are a little bit sore from doing all of your swimming. It's a good way just to learn that transition from one discipline across to another. Now this video is more about just getting into triathlon. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the actual training side of things. If you want to, you could get a coach or you could look at some other YouTube videos or do some reading on the internet and that kind of thing. But to be honest, I think the long and short of getting into your first triathlon is just to do lots of practice, lots of training. Maybe 8 to 12 weeks should be more than enough to get you ready to do your first sprint distance. When we're talking about getting ready for our first triathlon, you might be coming from a background of one of the different disciplines. Maybe you're already a cyclist and you haven't done much running or much swimming before. that would kind of mean that you've got to spend a little bit more time practicing those things, or vice versa. If you're a swimmer, but you've never ridden a road bike before, that might be a pretty good spot to start, because you're going to need to make sure that you can do all of the disciplines. Yes, you can be really good at one and kind of good at the others. That's totally fine. You don't want to drown in the swim. So you want to make sure that you're able to swim. I'm terrified of swimming. I swim like a rock. So my first triathlon was a huge learning curve for me. That's where I had to put most of my training for sure. So really the long and short of training is just doing more, doing lots and lots of riding, lots and lots of running, lots and lots of swimming, and just getting really good at each of the different disciplines. But there is one thing that a lot of different athletes of all different types of sports, especially the endurance sports we'll talk about, they call it a taper week. A taper week means that they're tapering off the amount of training that they're doing. They're doing significantly less training in the week leading up to the race. That way they're not waking up on race morning really tired and sore because they've been doing so much training. They're completely ready to go. So I would say, yeah, doing lots and lots of training and then having a taper week before race week. The next thing to talk about is what your nutritional plan might be. By that I mean, what are you eating and drinking before, during, and after the race? If we're talking about what are you going to be eating before, it might be a smart idea to have a nice light breakfast so that you've still got some energy throughout the race. Even if you're just starting out with a sprint distance, it's still a pretty big morning out there. So you might want to make sure that you're well fueled before you even get into the water. It's super important to make sure that you keep drinking lots of water all throughout the event. You're going to be sweating quite a bit because you're obviously exercising. So you've got to replace that with water and electrolytes, whether that's through gels or powder in your water. As a general rule of thumb, I say you want to be taking a sip of water every 15 minutes. It's obviously a little bit difficult to do during the swim, but at least for the bike ride and for the run, if you can just take a mouthful of water every 15 minutes. I'm telling you that because a sports scientist friend of mine told me that many years ago, so I've now learned that. Although gels might not be a necessity for a sprint distance because it is a bit of a shorter event, it's still probably not a bad idea to have one in your back pocket. You might hit the wall and get really tired and completely run out of energy, and you just need that little hit of a gel just to get you across the finish line. So don't discount the idea of a gel, even if you think you might not need it. Now it's race day. What are we doing the morning of race day? I think it's a good idea to just do a couple of little basic stretches, even if it's just walking around the car park doing some lunges or, you know, stretching out a little bit. Just make sure that your body's all nice and limber. And remember, you're about to go for a swim in possibly quite cold water. So I think a really important thing to do right before the race starts, I'm talking within 5 minutes of the actual race start, is while we're standing on the beach and everyone's at the start line, you'll notice that a lot of people will run straight into the water, put their head underwater, do a couple of paddles, just swim around a little bit so that they can get used to the temperature of the water. I remember I have a good friend of mine who did her first triathlon, and I'm sure she won't mind me telling the story so you can all learn from it, but she jumped into the water at the start of the triathlon and her body went completely into shock and she couldn't finish the rest of the triathlon because her body was so shocked from that first impact with the cold water. That's why I recommend just going into the water. You don't need to spend more than 30 seconds or a minute in there. You don't have to spend long. You just have to let your body acclimatize to the cold temperature that the water might be. Also, a lot of different triathlons all around the world will have different temperature cutoffs. By that, I mean, if the temperature is below a certain degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit, wherever in the world you are, you have to wear a wetsuit. They won't even let you start the race if you don't wear a wetsuit. Whereas if it's above that temperature, it's optional. I think regardless of whether it's optional or mandatory, I always recommend wearing a wetsuit because instead of swimming through the water like this, it's gonna help lift your body up so you can swim flatter and you can go faster, easier. It's literally cheating. So you really should be doing it because it's not against the rules because everybody's allowed to do it, but it will make your swim that much easier. So I do highly recommend a wetsuit, although it's another expense. The final thing is don't be too hard on yourself. If this is your first triathlon, you've got a lot of learning ahead. It might feel like a pretty steep learning curve. You're gonna learn what it feels like to put socks onto wet feet. You're gonna feel what it feels like to change from cycling shoes across to running shoes. You're gonna feel what it's like to run along grass in clip-in shoes. There's all these different things that I couldn't really explain in a video, but you're gonna learn them throughout your first race. So don't go to your first race chasing a win because I think you'll walk away unhappy because you might not get a win on your first one. Just use that as your learning experience. Congratulations, you've finished the race now. Now you're on your way home and you're taking all your stuff out the back of your car and your bike is there. Now your bike might be covered in a little bit of salt water. Maybe the race that you did in the swim, you found yourself out in the open ocean in the salt water and then you jump onto the bike straight after and all that salt water is dropping off onto the bike. If salt water sits on your bike, it can begin to rust parts. So I would strongly recommend washing your bike as well. And now you're sitting at home in front of the couch, you're allowed to take the afternoon off. You've done a really big job first thing in the morning. Most people were sitting in bed while you were paddling through the ocean or the lake or whatever it is. So now that you're sitting on the couch, you're allowed to eat an entire block of chocolate all by yourself, because that's how many calories you just burn in the morning. Great work. And you can go and start chasing some results in your next race. Maybe it's time to sign up for that Ironman 70.3, or if you're feeling gutsy like David Goggins, maybe it's time to sign up for a full distance, but make sure that that's at least a year away. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you've learned something about how to do your first triathlon. If you're really getting into it and you're gonna find yourself doing a 70.3, there's a small chance that I might see you up in Mooloolaba in Queensland in September. Maybe not, I haven't paid my entry fee yet, but I might see you there. Anyway, I'm gonna say thanks for watching. I hope you've learned a lot. If there's anything that you learned throughout your first few triathlons that we didn't mention in this video, please mention it in the comment section below. I know there's gonna be heaps of people watching these videos that haven't done triathlons before. So if we can give them all the information we can, I reckon that's a really good idea. Otherwise, thanks for watching and we'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.